My name is Margaret. I'm 74 years old, and I never thought I'd have to teach my own children about greed. But after their father passed, I saw a side of them I never wanted to believe was real. They weren't mourning. They were measuring. They weren't hugging me. They were hunting through his will. And when the fighting started, I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I just listened and made a plan. This is the story of how I gave my children a final lesson, one they'll never forget. After 49 years of marriage, losing Richard felt like losing a part of myself. The silence in the house was unbearable at first. I'd grown used to the little noises, his footsteps in the hallway, the way he cleared his throat when reading the paper, the soft clinking of his teacup. And then, suddenly, all of it was gone. The quiet settled in like dust, and I had no one to brush it away with. But I tried to be strong. I dressed each morning, made tea for one, and kept his favorite chair just as he left it. I thought the hardest part would be living without him. I was wrong. It started just days after the funeral. I overheard my son Michael in the hallway, whispering with his sister Emma. "We'll have to talk about the house," he said, not knowing I was close enough to hear. "And the boat. Maybe it's time to sell it off before Mom gets confused." Confused. I stood there frozen, pretending not to listen, pretending I didn't feel that word punch me in the chest. I had lost my husband, not my mind. A week later I walked into the kitchen and found the three of them, Michael, Emma, and my youngest Sarah, arguing over who would be the executor of the estate. The air was thick with tension. Emma accused Michael of trying to take more than his fair share. Sarah, always the quiet one, surprised me when she snapped, "We need to just get this over with." I stood there at the doorway, invisible in my own home. My heart didn't break. It hardened. These were the same children I had rocked to sleep, wiped tears for, cooked meals for. And now I was just a footnote in the story they were trying to rewrite. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply stepped out of the room and closed the door behind me. In that moment, I knew that something inside me had shifted. Not anger, not revenge, just resolve. If my children were going to treat this like a game, then I would be the one to teach them the final lesson, one they wouldn't expect, but one they would never forget. After that day in the kitchen, I became quiet. Not weak, just quiet. I decided to stop speaking so I could start observing. My role as the mother, the peacemaker, the soft shoulder. I stepped away from that, and I watched them like someone watching the final act of a play. I paid attention not to what they said, but what they didn't. They visited, yes, but not with the warmth of children wanting to spend time with their mother. No, their eyes wandered toward the locked cabinets, toward the framed deed on the study wall, toward the keys hanging near the back door. Their hands didn't reach for mine. They reached for what they thought was coming. Michael came around the most, but only to ask questions. About the car title. About the insurance policies. He brought coffee once, but it was cold by the time he got here. He never even sat down to drink it with me. Emma was different. She brought groceries, helped me sort through papers, and cried sometimes while we folded laundry. At first I thought she really cared, but after every soft moment came a hard one. She'd ask about the lake house, how much it was worth, who I planned to leave it to, and Sarah, my baby girl, texted often but rarely visited. When she did, it always ended with a question about if Dad kept the combination to the safe somewhere. I couldn't believe it, and yet, I could. I raised them. I saw flashes of this when they were children, fights over toys, jealousy at birthdays. But I never thought it would come to this. I began to take notes, not on paper, but in my mind. Every conversation was a clue, every visit was evidence, and slowly a plan started to form. I called a lawyer, not the one they knew but a new one, a woman who specialized in estate restructuring. We met privately. I told her everything, not just what I owned, but what I had witnessed in my own home. We drafted a new will, one with conditions, one with a message they wouldn't see coming. But before that day would ever arrive, I still held out hope. Maybe they'd change, Maybe one of them would remember what family meant, so I kept watching, quietly, patiently. The final version of my will was signed on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day that made everything feel still and serious. I remember sitting in the lawyer's office, hands folded tightly in my lap, knowing full well that what I was signing wasn't just paperwork, it was a message, a statement, a final act of love, and a necessary line of defense. I had it written so that all 3 children would be present at the time of the reading, and I included something special, a letter, one I wrote myself in the quiet of my bedroom, alone. I poured into it everything I had observed, everything I had felt, and the truth they refused to see about themselves. I didn't write it to shame them. I wrote it to wake them up. In the months that followed, I lived with a strange peace, not because things got better. If anything, the visits became fewer, and the conversations more transactional. But I felt prepared. I knew what would happen when the time came, and I had made sure that no one could tamper with my wishes. My lawyer held the sealed documents and the audio recording I'd made, my own voice, recorded one slow evening, steady and clear. When my health began to fade, I didn't tell them right away. I didn't want their final memories of me to be laced with calculation. I wanted them to see the mother they had, not the estate they wanted. But when the time did come, when I finally passed, they gathered, of course, for the reading, not for me, for what I left behind. They sat in my living room, the same one where they once played board games and opened Christmas gifts. The air was cold, the tension thicker than the winter outside. The lawyer read the will in calm, formal language. Each child was left a token amount, just enough to be acknowledged. Then she paused and said, "There's one more item, a message from your mother." She played the recording. My voice filled the room. I told them I saw their hearts in the months after their father's death. I told them I saw their silence, their arguments, their greed, and then I gave them a choice. One final condition. The full estate, including the lake house, would go to the one child who chose to share it equally with the others. If none of them did, everything would go to charity. The room fell completely silent. After my voice faded from the speaker, you could have heard the creak of the old clock on the mantel or the rain tapping against the window. My children, my grown, intelligent, successful children, sat there as if they'd been struck in the chest. Michael looked stunned, his mouth slightly open as though he wanted to argue with a voice that wasn't in the room. Emma lowered her eyes, her fingers nervously twisting the hem of her coat. Sarah let out a dry, bitter laugh. She muttered something about manipulation, but her voice cracked halfway through. No one said a word for a full minute. The lawyer sat calmly, hands folded, letting the silence settle like dust after a storm. Then, just as she was about to speak again, Emma stood. Her eyes were red, but her posture was straight. She looked at her siblings and said, "I'll share it." Her voice wasn't defiant or dramatic, just, "Sure." Michael scoffed. "Of course you would," he said, trying to look like the good one now. Sarah rolled her eyes but said nothing. Emma didn't flinch. She just looked at the lawyer and said, "I'll honor the condition. Whatever that means for me, I accept it." That was all it took. The lawyer nodded and opened a folder. "Then, per your mother's instructions, the estate will be entrusted to you, Emma, with legal oversight to ensure the terms are upheld." The air shifted. Not warmer, but clearer. My children wouldn't leave that room with everything they wanted, but they'd leave with exactly what they needed: the truth. Some might call what I did cruel, others might call it wise. But to me, it was a final act of motherhood. I had spent decades giving them love, lessons, support, and still, they forgot what mattered when money was in the room. So I reminded them. I reminded them that integrity matters more than inheritance. That what you do when no one's watching speaks louder than any title or deed. I didn't want my final legacy to be a battle. I wanted it to be a mirror, and whether they liked the reflection or not, I know I left with dignity, grace, and the strength to say this was my final lesson, and I hope one day, they'll thank me for it.